I know you all met me yesterday, but for the purposes of the video, we have to do this. And I moved to LA about 3 years ago because I had a dream to get into film scoring. It was something I'd thought about for years. And then I finally was like, wow, I'm touring so much that my home base doesn't have to be in New York. Actually, I really want to be in Los Angeles. And at the time, we were experiencing a huge drought out there. I was like, well, I guess I'd better move out there before the water fully runs out. And then I can figure out what my next step is. And I just want to share this little story with you because it's totally about manifesting dreams. So I've been thinking about film scoring for a while. Like, my music is already very cinematic, very dramatic, like you feel immersed in a film score. At least that's my intention. Is somebody playing beats? Oh yeah. I mean, that was cool. So I decided, yeah, I'm gonna move out to LA. I feel like whenever you move, it's a whole process of feng shui. I had all these things tucked away in a closet I hadn't looked at in years, and it was finally time to do a big purge. I moved everything out from New York to LA via Amtrak, which is a great way to move if you ever need that tip. It cost me $400 to move, which is pretty amazing. 22 items on a pallet. And so I moved to LA, and earlier that year I played at Immersion Festival in Costa Rica. And backstage I had met this videographer named Christian, and I told him my dream of getting into film scoring. And then I eventually moved to LA, and then he's like, well, I'm starting to work on this documentary about Svalbard, which is an island north of Norway in the Arctic Circle. And he's like, why don't you write a couple of sketches for me? And I was like, can I see some footage? And he's like, well, just write these sketches. Like, I want this kind of abstract thing, and imagine this landscape, and just write something like that. So I recorded and wrote some very minimal electronic background and sent it to him. And the director, so the editor got those sketches that I wrote, and then the editor worked them in. When the director saw the first few cuts of the film, he was like, wow, what is this music? It's perfect. And Christian was like, well, I know this amazing film score composer. She just moved to LA. Let's set up a meeting. And so I met up with him, and even though I had never scored a film before, I had scored small things, but we talked about it, and I got signed to write this 90-minute feature score for a feature documentary for Time magazine. And so that was my first journey. And it was pretty amazing, but once I landed the job, then I was like, oh, now I have to actually write 90 minutes of music. That's a lot. And at first I was procrastinating, and I, wasn't really sure. And then one moment, inspiration kicked in, and all of a sudden I was like, yes. And that's sometimes how it happens when you're writing music. You're just, all of a sudden, something clicks, and then you feel uber confident, and everything's working. And I wrote the theme song to the documentary, and then from there, everything else fell into place. So that was my first foray into film score music. But I've continued to write and produce my own music. I produce everything. I use Machine, I use Logic, and then I perform in Ableton. And so for this workshop, what I wanted to show is what my experience is like what a live performance is, because many of you haven't seen me perform live. And then break it down for you, share my screen with you so you can see how I take a track. If you learned a bit about warping today, I understand from Daniel. And then, how I get different versions mastered and what I do with those. And then talk a bit about gear, because we all love gear, don't we? So, again, this is, just imagine the context. Like, close your eyes for a second. Imagine a huge stage, beautiful lights. Usually I request white and blue lighting, haze, and this big stage. There's a huge crowd. You all are in the front row because you're all VIP. and you all have your dancing outfits on, and you just cannot wait. And I'm so excited to be here because you all are my special guests coming to this incredible concert. And we're gonna take you on a little journey. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Backstory. Aisha, backstory. Skundumar, lavuta. Aisha, backstory. Aisha, backstory. Skundumar, lavuta. Aisha, backstory. Shakes me, makes me lighter. Feel your best on my breath. Teardrop on the fire. Feel your best on my breath. This my sky, pulling me deeper. Heaven of mine, sun cools the water, freedom possession. Heaven of mine, sunlight on water. Thank you so much. Thank you.
That was tight.
What?
That was tight.
Oh, thanks. All right, so I'm just going to get the UDMI cable, and then I'm going to share with you a little bit of the breakdown of this process. And we're going to see the smoke behind the mirrors, the man behind the curtain, the woman behind the curtain. Up the BPM a little bit because there's something about the excitement of being on stage, the excitement of the crowd, and when I perform my tracks at the original tempo, they often feel like they're kind of dragging. And you may find this as well when you start to perform on your tracks. I don't go too high, too much above, because sometimes that can kind of degrade the sound. So here, I have my very first track set up. I just dragged and dropped a mastered version of Leia without violin. So when I talk to my mastering engineer, I tell him all the different versions that I want, anticipating what kind of performances I will be doing in the future. And this particular track has violin as the featured instrument. So I got a performance version without the violin, the lead violin. There's still some violins in there, and it kind of helps fill out the sound. But I wanted to make sure that I would be doing the live violin. And I was performing on a wireless unit today. I could have come out in the crowd, but I didn't. But I sometimes even jump down onto the dance floor and perform in the crowd, and people form a big circle around me. It's pretty magical. So, as you can see here, I have this first one, I have it labeled, and you probably already all learned that, but you can relabel song bites in Ableton by just hitting Command and R, and then I could rename this to be whatever I want. And usually I'll break up tracks into intro, chorus, outro, or drop, or something, so that on the fly I can react. And the more that you get to know how you've divided up your tracks, however you're performing, I specifically also had set up the outro in channel 2 instead of channel 3, so that if I want to, I can kind of, play around with the mixing of the two, so that then I can transition into another song. Also, I found this really cool trap drum loop that worked really well with this song, just to give it a little extra energy when the beat drops. So at the very beginning, I throw on a little bit of this ping pong delay, just to kind of spread the sounds around in the room, in the concert hall, wherever I am. I can play with that, turn it on and off. I can also directly control that from my laptop, but I think it's cooler to turn a knob instead of doing that. And then when the beat drops, what it sounds like without the additional beat. Here's what it sounds like with my additional drum loop. Which one would you rather dance to? I also have a loop setup, so I've made my key on my keyboard, the L key, be my loop key. And I've already preset a loop here in case I want this intro to kind of go on a little longer, an infinite amount of times. Keep them waiting, keep them wanting more. I can make this loop a bit longer if I want. I can drag it out or make it shorter. And then I have this next one set up as a chorus, and this loop I have you see this little arrow right here? That's the trigger point. That's where, if I hit this track, it's gonna play right from there. That's where it's gonna start. I could move that out or in wherever I want, but this is so that if I'm doing the intro and then I'm gonna switch to the chorus, I know that it's gonna start at this particular point in the song, and then this part, if I turn on the loop, this particular section, which is the chorus, is going to loop infinitely long. And that's so that I can pick up my violin, because that's the point in the song where I play violin. And I could go out in the crowd, I could, interact and dance. The only thing is I have to come back to my station to turn off the loop. So that's the chorus. Also on my beat track, I set up a beat glitcher and a basic low-high pass filter, and then an EQ, which isn't actually doing anything. That's okay. And this is connected to my controller. Unfortunately, I think they need to send me a new one because the knobs are not reacting as I would like them, which is what that awful performance boo-boo was at the beginning. But, we just rolled with it. I knew you knew exactly what was happening, and I was embarrassed for myself. But I was also happy that it happened because I could show you kind of like it's no big deal. Like an accident happens. It sounded pretty horrible, right? I mean, like, what was that? It was this thing? No. But there's a lot of different options you can set up in a Tornado Beat Glitcher to affect how your beats are interacting, and then it gives me a little more control over what I'm doing. I feel like I can be more interactive. I can drop up the beat, of course, in time, because that would be lame if it wasn't. So it just gives me a little more control over what I'm doing, and I feel like I'm more interactive. I can be a little more reading the crowd or whatever. So usually at this point where the loop turns off and it's the outro, I will immediately drop out the extra beat and then turn the ping pong delay back on. And right at that moment, I have my next track ready to go. So this is only awkward because it's only showing me a little bit of my screen, so I can't do what I normally do. But let's just do that transition once more. Okay, you ready? This track is called The Finding. And for this one, it's very different than the original. I set up, well, not super different, but I figured out a way to perform it live that felt really good to me. So I basically took the version that had no vocals and no lead violin. There is cello in this as well, but I left the cello in, and when I do perform with the cellist, they add additional cello notes on top of the cello. With this one, also for the intro, I like to play around with the ping pong delay. And then I also have my piano set up over here so that I can add when I was singing, you probably noticed that I was playing just a pretty simple A octave on the synth, which is just the piano. Also, the harpsichord is triggering as well. And I just worked with this track for a while, figuring out what would make the most dynamic performance. And I set it up as, so the performance version, mastered version of the track, without violin and without vocals, and then I set up my loop points. First, I warped the track, because the only way that you can set different loop points is if you have your track warped. You also have to make sure that you've warped your track properly, and I will go over that in a moment. So I have this intro looping, and then I do some violin, and I do some singing on top of it, and some synths, and maybe it seems like I have ADD up here. I mean, if I just stood here and pressed play and danced around, that could also be a great performance. And there would certainly be a lot less to think about, or I could print all of this as a new performance version. I could print it with a new beat, I could print it with these different loops already set, but the difference is that when I'm performing live, if I feel like I want this intro to go 3 times instead of 2, I can. If I want it to go only once, or if I want to skip ahead, I have more control over that. And the chorus is set, you see this little arrow again? It's basically like a prelude into the part that I'm going to be looping. And you hear this version of the track has no beats in it. It just has a little bit of a, what is that? Like a snare? No, it's not a snare, sorry. It's like a brushy kind of drum hit, but it's not a full beat. And I chose this version because I have worked with a drummer. So I got a mastered version of the track without most of the drums. And then I found a beat loop that would work really well with this. That can add a little more excitement as well. This is the outro that I've selected. This way, I can perform a seamless set. I don't have to stop in between each song like you might as a singer-songwriter. I have some transitions already kind of predetermined. And when I get my live set ready for a gig, I'll sometimes kind of decide like which track is going to go into which one, what's my transition, what BPM am I going from to. Like the track before was at 73 BPM and this one's at 79, but I tend to perform it at 80 or 82. Right now it's at 80. And so sometimes these transition places, like I could up the BPM and you wouldn't really notice too much. You would kind of, but it allows for a smooth transition into the next song. This next track, Teardrop, is set up. Now you see over in my master channel, I have these labeled with the BPM. This track, Teardrop, is originally at 68 BPM. I like to perform it at 75 BPM because it's cool. And if I trigger either from my computer, if I hit this little arrow here, it will switch, and I just have to make sure that channel 3, which I'm going to play from, channel 3 right here, not this version of Teardrop, but this one. And also, so I'm going to drop the intro. So to get ready, I have this previous track looping, and it's kind of setting a mood, a tone. I don't want this to go on too long, but I want to give myself time to get ready, make sure that everything's all set up. If I have any loop points that I need to make sure they are on or off, I can set those up. Or you already have it all set up and you're just ready to rock. So in this case, I have the track turned up, and now I'm gonna have to do something really fancy. I'm going to hit this trigger over here on my APC Mark II while I turn down the fader on track 2, which is currently playing. So let's see how that sounds. And I'm also looking at the counter up here, which is telling me when my measure ends. 2, 3, 4. So sometimes I'm tapping my foot so that, because if I trigger it too soon, I will miss, like I could automate all of this, but it would be less fun because there's some thrill in the danger of doing it wrong. And if I mess up, well, usually I have some tricks to kind of mask the fact that I messed up. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, that was bad. So that might be something I'd want to work on, right? Should we try that again? Let's try that again. So let's try this time. We're gonna fade out the first track. From my controller, I don't know if you learned this yet, but this master button on the bottom of each track, this little square, is stop all clips in this audio channel. Also from my controller, this one right here. From my controller, I also have a button where I can stop all clips. And that's just to make sure that nothing's playing when I turn up the fader, the volume fader, on that track. We're getting ready to transition. Okay, can we do this? So this time, what I'm gonna do is pull down the fader on 2. There's still gonna be some sound happening because it's on a ping pong delay. And I'm tapping my foot. 1, 2, 3. Oh, that was good. So another way, there are many different ways you can transition, but as a live electronic artist, I like to be able to sometimes talk in between tracks. I like to connect with my audience, but I also like to be able to have some kind of cushion of sound going, just so that it's not totally dead or totally silent, because I might lose the energy, I might lose people's attention span. They might be ready to move on to the next stage or the next experience, or their trip is wearing off or something. These are all things to keep in consideration when you are playing your tracks out. I do find that I like to talk a little bit to my audience because it connects me to them and me to them. Yes, did I just repeat myself? I didn't used to be so comfortable speaking on the mic. It used to be a very terrifying thing. And it's something that I worked on. I started to talk a lot on the mic, and then I was like, no, that's way too much. Let's rein it in a little bit. And, there are some DJs, some performers, some producers out there who do not speak at all. They do not even have a mic up there. They just hold up their arms in prayer and bow to the audience, and that's it. But I personally find, you're so intimately connected to the performer through their music, through their sound journey, through this experience that they're taking you through. And to hear the timbre of their voice, to hear some of the words they're speaking. And I like to offer a little bit of inspiration, a little bit of insight. I feel like people really enjoy that as a connection. And, it's kind of a scary thing to get up here and have all of these eyes. I mean, right now, this is a little nerve-wracking. It could be. But part of the art of performance as well is to just really own your craft, really own your equipment, know what everything does, have backup plans. One of my backup plans is, as I told you yesterday, is that I have my violin running through a pedal board, my own DI, my own effects, and then a wireless unit. And then I have my vocals running through a separate pedal board. If I were to have a sound engineer controlling all of my vocal effects, then sometimes when I would get on the mic, then I would be talking with a lot of effects on it, and that's always really annoying when you're trying to understand what somebody's saying. So that's why I like to have a bit of my own control of what's going on with my effects. And same with the violin. There are some songs that I play where I really like a lot of delay, so it kind of is more ethereal and spacey and kind of has a lot more trails of sound. And then with the reverb pedal, it just is more of a pure, beautiful representation of what I want my violin to sound like, as in it sounds like a violin in like a concert hall or Carnegie Hall. So how many of you have experimented with warping your own tracks already? Or pieces of music? Great. So I am going to just do a quick demo of how I would import a track. Let's say after Teardrop, I'm thinking of adding a song. And we are going to add, which one should it be? So I'm going to create, and I'm going to insert scene. And that didn't go in the right place. Yes, it did, actually. It's called the same thing that I selected, so it's called Teardrop. I don't want it to be called Teardrop. And I'm just going to create a few more scenes here, just to give me a little working room. And then I'm going to go over to wherever it is that I keep my tracks. And these are some brand new tracks that I have. And I have all of the mastered versions of the track that I put out in the world, as in violin, strings, vocals. So this one is called Gold. And I'm just going to drag and drop it over here to audio channel 1. And I already know the BPM is 97. So I'm just going to change my master BPM up here to 97. And then I'm going to warp it. And basically I can see all the waveforms. I'm going to go warp. Then I'm going to zoom in, which is move your mouse over here. And then on a Mac, I'm not sure what it is on a PC, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Now you can see that it's not totally lining up with any kind of, like you can see visually where the beats are. And that's because at the very beginning, there's a bit of extra time at the very beginning. So we need to change where the track is, the start point where it's warping from. And don't worry if you don't understand this totally, that's okay. I'm just giving you a bit of an overview of how I work with my tracks. So I'm control clicking on, or right clicking on this Ableton kind of intuitively sees that there's like a little black mark here, and you hover over it, and immediately a marker appears, but it's not going to do anything yet. So I'm going to right click on it and then say set 1.1.1 here. Now that's the start of the song. Now I'm going to again right click on it and say warp from here straight. And actually, I'm going to turn the warp off. I'm going to change, because this is not just a beat track, this is a complex track. And again, don't worry about this. Just showing you my process. So then I'm going to warp it again. And then I'm going to zoom out a bit and go take a look at, well, that looks pretty good. And now some tracks you may have to go in and set multiple warp points or multiple markers to make sure that the track is not straying. Like there, you can see that it's slightly off the beat. So I'm going to double click on this right here, and just slightly nudge it so that it's a little more solid. And then another thing I like to do after I've warped a track is to then go in and just take a preview with the metronome on. The metronome is not audible, and I'm not sure why, but I don't have time to go figure that out. But I just tried throwing a beat over that just to see if they line up. If they were out of time, this wouldn't feel solid. So then what I might want to do is, I'm going to then show you how I divide these tracks up for performance. So I could either decide to perform this track exactly as is, with no changes, no additions, no switching around. And that I'm going to do with different loops. So we have our intro. I'm going to copy paste, which is actually, oops. Copy and paste. So the same version, after I've already warped it, is right below. So this first one I'm just going to call gold intro. And I tend to write whatever the track is in caps. That way I'm on stage, maybe it's bright out, maybe, I just want to be able to see it pretty good. Over here on the master track, I'm going to rename it as well. I'm going to call it gold, 97 BPM. And if I wanted to perform it a touch faster, I would call it like gold 100 BPM. And that way, when you trigger from the master, it will play at 97 BPM. And let me just show you, if I call this gold 100 BPM and stop the track, and now I'm going to trigger it from the side over here from the master channel. Look at what happens to the BPM up there.
Whoa.
I'm so glad I can impress you. So let's,
Yeah.
but you have to put BPM, as far as I know. Maybe, I'm just showing you my method. So you must write BPM afterwards. Let's actually try that. Let's see if we just write 100. Let's put this at 50. Where did it go? Yeah. This is gold at 50 BPM because I didn't put BPM after, so now we know for sure. Okay, so that's the intro, and you can kind of visually see from these peaks and valleys of the track kind of where things are in the track as far as, like my intro, I think the strings end right about at 10. So let's check that. Let's play it at So if I had the end triangle on here, and that's probably not the technical term, end triangle. So you see this triangle over here is all the way at the end of the track. I do like to work with my full tracks for creating these performance versions because if I set an intro loop, I want to be able to then go into the next part of the track without having to then trigger a new clip. So from here, I can decide how long I want the intro to play, if I want to, get all spacey and stretched out, time warpy, play around with the high and low pass filters or whatever other types of filters I have. And then I just hit the L on my keyboard and that turns off the loop, and then we can go into the rest of the track. Another interesting part of this track is, and I know you're not familiar with it at all because it's not released yet, but there is the music video that is out with the ballerinas. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set a loop point for the chorus because choruses are usually really great to drop. Like, you're like, okay, we had enough of this and now let's go to the meat of the song. Let's skip through some of this other stuff. I like to be able to have control, kind of probably what Beat Kitty, for some of you who were at her class, similar with a DJ, you're setting cue points. You want to be able to, kind of like it's a bookmark in a book. You're like, I know exactly where the chorus is because I have this clip already set up to be the chorus, and that way I can jump ahead if I want to have that control. So I'm pretty sure my chorus is here because that looks sort of like it, but I like this end chorus the best. So just making sure, I'm going to double clicking on this clip that I'm going to I'm going to rename it as chorus. No, that's not how you spell chorus. Okay, gold is now renamed. This clip is renamed as a chorus. There's nothing that I've pre-selected yet, but I'm going to move both of these intro marker points to this last bit of the song. And I'm going to roughly do it with it zoomed out. Then I'm going to zoom in and further fine tune it. And it looks like I did a great job. Good job. Now, if I maybe wanted to set a little, well, let me show you what that sounds like. So I'm just double checking. So the end point I'd want to set at the end of the chorus, but leave this outro as an outro loop that I will set up. So I'm just going to drag and drop this over here. I'm going to leave the other triangle at the end but I'm going to move it closer in. Actually, yes. So now I'm going to show you how that sounds. I might want to add in another beat, because at the moment this is the only track playing. So I can't really play with it a whole lot. That sounded pretty good. We just need to make sure that we have our loop set, which I didn't when I went to go find this drum loop. All right, so here we have, so I had to turn on my loop trigger here to make that into a loop. And then let's just check out what this random drum loop is going to do. Oh, I don't really like that one at all. Do you? No. You can even take drum loops from other songs. That's what I did with this. Dangerous is actually from a track that I wanted to pull the drums out of it. I found a loop that didn't have any vocals, or most of the instrumentation is not in there. So yeah, let's see what this one sounds like. And maybe with this drum loop, because it's a little abrasive. Gives you some ideas of what you could do with that. And then I'm going to also set an outro loop here, or an outro clip. So I'm going to copy, right click and copy, and then paste. And so this gold clip should have the same settings as the previous one. I'm going to rename it as outro. And you can see it looks the same as chorus right now. I'm double clicking on the outro clip, and then I'm going to, just as a full safe, have this clip set up so that I have an outro for transitioning into a new track. And it looks like I need to kind of tighten some things up in here. But because it's an outro, it doesn't really matter. It's just going to be a spacey thing that I can play. And I'm going to do something like that. There's currently a little bit of hi-hat from the crash at the end of the chorus, so I'm gonna just kind of preview it and see what makes for a good outro loop. That sounds pretty good to me. So there's so much more I could show you, but I hope that gave you a little bit of an idea. I would also just rename these so that they're all actually at 97, not 100. And the cool thing about Ableton is that, like, what I actually do is I will just, like this set that I prepared is a set that I did in upstate New York. I played for Deities and Demons Masquerade Ball at Cosm, and that was super fun. And so what I did is I just opened that set and then save live set as, and then I just save it as a new set. I do that first before I start moving things around, making changes. That way I'm starting fresh and I'm not, I'm kind of starting fresh, but I pretty much have everything that I want. I'm just gonna start moving things around. Like, let's say I really want to perform Teardrop right after the Dim Saints remix. Well, it's actually right there. The Dim Saints remix of Brim Mar. But let's say I want to move up this Fave track remix by Suhan, and I want to move it up. And you can see, like, not everything is totally organized, but that's based on how I perform. Like, these particular tracks, actually, this is a pretty cool one. Want to hear it just for a second? Yeah. This is one that I don't play any live instruments on it. It has this cool intro, and then a drop, and then there are two versions of this track. One is without violin, and one is with violin. And so when I perform it, I kind of work my faders kind of like a DJ would, you know, switching from one side of the deck to the other side of the deck, so that I can create this kind of live improv on the fly that is different every time. So, you ready for this? It's not going to be the full track. We're just going to play you a bit of it. So, if I were starting my track, if I'm jumping up on stage and I'm like, okay, I'm going to start my set with this track. First, I have to make sure that my controller is surrounding, like, you can see that orange highlight. That's my view on my APC 40. What is in orange, what is banded in orange is what I'm seeing here. There are ways you can set this up so you can see more clips at a time or less clips, and this is how I feel comfortable. So let's drop it. This is the version of the track without the lead violin. but maybe I would want that to keep going, but I'd fade it out and bring in the next track. Like this next one is a pretty cool one, so let's say this one is continuing to play. And then I'm gonna ease this other track in, which is at 120. Right now, I'm at 119. So it's fun to preview different tracks and see like what makes sense going from one into the other. And when it's your own music, you know, sometimes that's a little harder because you don't have quite as much repertoire to work with. But what you can do, first of all, I really highly suggest that when you're ready to get your tracks mastered, that you consider different performance versions of your music, especially since a lot of you are vocalists, instrumentalists, so you have different versions of your tracks that you can work with. And it also just opens up a lot more opportunities to create different things from it. Like some of my tracks, I actually use some of the textures from them for a deep Sonos set. I'm like, oh, that's a cool pad or a cool sound space. That actually would work really well. Just this tiny little moment in that track would work really well for a deep Sonos live set. So at this point, we're just going to transition into a little bit of gear discussion and Q&A. So can I get the lights up a little bit? A volunteer. You might be eligible to win a Swedish golden toaster oven for your contributions to the efforts of the feminine movement of female music, electronic music production. Yeah, that's perfect. So I showed you basically what I do in a live performance, and obviously this is a little more of a fish in a glass fish tank. I feel like, you know, you're all judging me and watching me, and now you know all my secrets, and now you're all going to be Haana's up on stages as well. But that's okay. I mean, I feel like part of the learning process is just learning how other people work. Like the cool thing about Ableton Live is that there are so many options, so many ways you could set up, so many capabilities, so many different tools to incorporate into your set. I didn't start out with a setup like this. My setup was much more simple. And then I added pieces as I felt more comfortable. Like I added a MIDI controller keyboard. It's not called a keyboard, it's a MIDI controller keyboard, because it controls MIDI. It is not a keyboard. A Nord would be a keyboard. And that was an important bit of information that I learned at the beginning of my journey. Do not call it a keyboard, call it a MIDI controller keyboard. This is a MIDI controller because it's controlling all the MIDI, or you can just call it a controller. And I like to refer to what I do on stage is, I call myself a one-woman orchestra or a one-woman electronic orchestra, merging art, tech, and music. And I can call what I do here, even though right now I'm half-assing it, honestly, because my knobs aren't quite working, so I have to actually get this sent in and have it looked at because it's not performing the way I want it to. Actually, some of the knobs aren't lighting up, so it's being a little unreliable, but I have had it for 2.5 years. So I call this controllerism. Basically, anytime you're kind of manipulating or tweaking sounds, I think, you know, if you are really into nature or recording field sounds, like you could even go to Home Depot and record sound samples of like 2 bricks rubbing against each other, or 2 screws. You're in the aisle with all the screws and you're like, ding, and you have your little field recorder and your headphones on, and people are like, what is up with her? Oh, she's really cool. You know, like, I don't know about you, but when I go into Home Depot, I feel like I get ogled a lot because they're like, what's she doing in Home Depot? Like, does she know how to use tools? Well, actually, I've got a DeWalt drill, titanium drill bits, and I've got a DeWalt sander, so you can just eat that. Okay, I know I got off track here. So, and then I also have my duet, Apogee duet over here. Everything is running into this soundboard. I have a monitor today, which is amazing. And we actually got another sub for this mini sound system that we have here. And I had everything preset so that I didn't have to do the mad dash that I did yesterday. So everything was a bit more of a smooth transition. And when talking about gear, like I'm in my head, I'm categorizing like, okay, is this plugged into this? This is connected to that. Okay, and we've got my pedal board for my violin. That's connected to my wireless. Cool. Okay, and now my vocal mic. We got the male and female proper parts are connected. Do you know about that? Yeah. If you're ever talking about XLRs and you're like, is it the male or the female end? We'll just think about the proper parts, you know? Then you'll know which one is which. So there's a mic input on the TC Helicon Voice Live 3. That's coming out of the left mono into the board. And there are different ways you can set up this TC Helicon Voice Live 3, but that's how I've chosen to set it up. And then my MIDI controller keyboard, now you all know what it's called, is connected to my laptop, and then I've double-checked the settings over here in Live Preferences. What I do before I get on stage is, you know, if I have the luxury of having a drum riser, which is basically a small platform like 8x8, and it rolls onto stage, that I can have everything preset. I'm not bringing anything out. I'm just, you know, it's a really smooth transition. That's in my tech rider. Other option is 2 DJ booths on a stage. I don't really prefer DJ booths because I feel like I'm a half a person and my whole outfit is in consideration. I mean, here we have like a little window that you can sort of see my beautiful black skirt. I'm just making fun, but you know, like a DJ booth, you can only see the top half of a person. And so for me to feel more connected to an audience, I prefer using 2 keyboard stands. And on this keyboard stand, which I usually use, I have a road case lid, which is very sturdy and stable. 2 feet by 4 feet road case lid, like a Pioneer DJ mixer setup. I use the lid off of that. So usually when I go to a festival, I'm lid shopping because they never read that part of my rider. So I'm like, okay, will this lid work? Will this lid work? It's kind of fun. But actually, I eventually would like to travel with my own lids that I'm not shopping when I'm there. And then I request 2 keyboard stands. And then I'm usually advancing a 49 or 61 key MIDI controller keyboard because this is a lot of gear to travel with. And then, so I'm backstage, I have everything all preset, or maybe I've had the luxury of just keeping everything on stage because I'm a headliner and I don't have to move anything. I can be a diva that way. So here I'm just making sure that I have my, on the audio output, that I have my Apogee Duet selected. And even though I'm not inputting any audio, I still select the Duet. The other option would be the built-in microphone and the built-in output. And the built-in output is the 1/8" jack that's on your laptop. But if you have an audio interface, it's way better to use that. And then my in-out sample rate is set to 44,100, which we could go into that in more detail, but this is not, we're not talking about that right now. And then the buffer size, if I were to be running my violin and my vocals through this, I'd want to experiment to minimize the amount of latency. You probably have heard about latency, where if the buffer size of the computer is processing a whole lot of information, and then you're also running some live instruments through it, sometimes you can have like a delayed signal. Like I'd play a note, and then a couple of seconds later it would come out to you through the speakers. That's not cool. So that's something, you know, we're not going to go into it in depth, but something to definitely think about if you are running your live instruments or your vocals through your Ableton set. And what A Path Untold and I talked about earlier today we want to actually, because there's so many options out there. There's so many options for audio interfaces, so many different price points, so many different price points for both live microphones and recording microphones, all the gear, controllers, MIDI controller keyboards, that we thought it'd be really great to send you all a list and just give you, like, here's some different price points. I personally love to order from Sweetwater. They include a 2-year warranty with every item that you purchase, unlike Guitar Center, where you have to additionally purchase insurance for your gear. This just covers your gear for 2 years, and I actually had a Tascam audio recorder that I had in a checked bag on a plane, and I arrived at my destination and the screen was completely cracked. And I contacted them. They're like, send us your audio recorder. They took a look, they couldn't fix it, so they sent me a brand new one for no charge. So they're really great, really good resource. And they also send you candy when you order something from them. All right, so I think that would be the best way, because we each have a very unique, probably a lot of unique goals with what we want to accomplish with Ableton or with our music, whether it's production or whether it's performance. This has been focused around what I do for live performance. But I think that it's really important to consider both quality and, you know, what you can afford. What can get you started right now? What actually you can add to your setup so that you can, you know, I like to think about it as small increments of investments. And like, I will buy a really amazing pair of boots that will last me for 5 years. Like, I love Fry boots. I'm not in any way connected with them at all. But if my boots will last me 5 years, versus, you know, a cheap pair of boots that will last me maybe like half a year, I'd rather invest a bit more money up front and purchase something that is quality and I could take to a cobbler and, you know, get the heels repaired or whatever, because I kind of run them into the ground, fixing cars and doing carpentry and things. I actually do those things. All right, so I just think that it's really important to consider all of these things when investing in your gear, but it's also the same with like a photographer. You could have all the best, the most amazing gear, and still take really horrible photos. So it's not necessarily about how much and what type of gear you have. It's about the tools that you're using to enable you to produce the best music possible, but also that you are focused on honing your craft and really investing the time, because it's definitely like learning a new language, and it's not going to happen overnight. But I think it's really important also to just consider what your specific needs are with the kind of gear that you're going to invest in and what you want to accomplish with that. So, any questions?
I have a question just about your Ableton controller. What is it?
This one is the Akai APC40 Mark II. There is the Akai APC40 Mark I, and that one was a bigger, more square unit. When they came out with this one, this is much more portable. This actually fits in my away suitcase, is my carry-on that I put all of my gear in.
So some of the vocals you were doing, were they doubled and you were singing over recording, or was it there was other?
Yes, yeah. So on Teardrop, there are studio vocals in the track as well, and I personally found that it you know, like some studio recordings of vocalists, they actually do multiple takes and then layer those on top of each other. And so that's what I was looking to accomplish for a live performance. It's not lip syncing, it's adding on. Cool, thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, yes.
Do you ever feel like it's important to adjust the frequency to like the 432 or anything like that, or you don't really?
That's a great question. So 432 hertz, everything here is 440 hertz, and all of the third-party synths are usually out of the box at 440 hertz. It's a bigger discussion, but a lot of people feel, and there's been a lot of research done that kind of shows that 432 hertz is more, it's a frequency that's more in exercise, because recording violin at 432, I had to drop the tuning down 8 points. And so when I was recording, I was like, is this in tune? Is it not in tune? I can't really tell, because I've been playing violin since I was 3 at 440 hertz, or 441, which is orchestras play at 441. And then a lot of the synths, you can go into the settings, and I'll just show you really quickly. Some of them it's easier to find, and others it's not as easy to find, but you can find. It just requires a lot more tweaking, but it is totally possible. So I'm just going to quickly show you. And this is the last thing that I'm going to show you, and then we're going to wrap up, because we have something more exciting. I mean, not more exciting, we have another thing after this. So, with In Contact, this is my favorite piano sample. It's Alicia's keys. It was actually Alicia who played all of these sounds. And you could actually tune the master tune, you could actually double click on it and be more accurate, like that 432. So now if I play that, and I have the harpsichord also up, so you can hear how dissonant that sounds. And this is just the piano by itself. Turn off the ping pong. To my ear, it sounds a little flat, but it was a really cool exercise to produce 40 minutes of music at 432 hertz. Yeah, there are a lot of different schools of thought of whether or not it's more spiritual or not, but it's a really cool exercise. You know, there's a lot of research out there that you can explore that talks about more in depth about the different hertz. There are other hertz that are also considered to be very sacred, very spiritual. So yeah, something to consider and think about. And if you have more questions, we can come up and ask me afterwards, but I just want to wrap this up. Thank you so much for being part of this live performance demo and gear discussion. We could probably turn this into a 3-hour session, but I hope that you all are having an amazing time. And thanks again to everyone who is showing up for yourselves and teaching yourselves way more knowledge and just, getting a handle on your future. Thank you so much.